Welcome to the RAMP webinars. This is component number 7, calendars. And as you can see, this component is valued at 5 points. I'm Mark Kranz.
And I'm Karen Griffith.
We want to start with some disclaimers. We encourage you to always check the website, the ASCA website, to make sure you have the most current RAMP rubric. It does get tweaked now and then, and we don't want you to be using an old version. Even though the tweaks may be small, it's important to ensure you're using the latest version. And regardless, in terms of tweaking the rubric, the procedures we're going to kind of talk about, the points and tips we're going to provide today won't change because of the tweaking of a rubric. We really want to encourage you that the rubric is really your guide to submitting a grade application. It's very concrete. It's very clear about what is and isn't included, and remember, it's exactly what the reviewers read to evaluate your application.
So for this section, we're going to reference the ASCA National Model book, pages 56 and 57, and the ASCA National Model Implementation Guide, pages 99 through 105. That's where you can find more detail, and in the implementation guide you can find many examples of good calendars that have been submitted. In this section we're talking about the counselors developing, publishing, and sharing calendars of school counseling activities. This is not school activities, this is the school counseling program activities. Its purpose is to inform students, parents, and teachers, administrators, all stakeholders about those events, giving them enough information that they can plan and join when appropriate. It includes one annual calendar for the counseling program plus 2 weekly calendars from each counselor, one from the spring and one from the fall.
The annual calendar. So it's based on the most recent academic school year, and it's going to include the important activities and events for the entire school counseling progress, from the beginning of the school year, August, through the end of the school year, May or June. And it's the important activities. You want the annual calendar to reflect your goal. You want to share your co-curriculum. You don't want to list individual counseling on your annual calendar. There might be some big kickoff for your school safety program or your anti-bullying program, or you might have an AODA component to the program. You might have a college and career going kickoff and events. You might have college day where everyone wears their sweatshirt. Those are the big things that you want on your annual calendar. And you do want to provide details that allow an outsider to say, oh, this is the week where they're doing the career college kickoff, and here are the activities that are going. So as a stakeholder, as a parent, I kind of can be informed about what are some of the things that are going on school-wide that are being driven by the school counseling program. So those specific dates are really important. The annual calendar is not tightly tied to the percentages of time on the annual agreement, but it reflects that. So we're going to need to see direct and indirect services showing up on the annual calendar. So just in summary, the annual calendar detail. The more detail you can tell us about those big events, so I could, if I wanted to as a stakeholder, choose to participate, I would know that from looking at the calendar. It reflects my goals. So I identify core curriculum that's going on. So the week of February 5th through is when we're really focusing on some of the transitioning for 5th graders, transition activities for 5th graders to 6th grade. So the core curriculum it identifies that. The time, the dates, that kind of detail is important. You want to make sure that your calendar is really representative of all the things you do. Don't say, well, that's not that important. If it's a big event and it's driven by the school counseling department, you want to include it. So a lot of school counseling departments at the high school have kind of like a college signing day. So when kids have been accepted to 2 or 4 year programs, there's kind of a celebration. You know, you want to be looking at all the things that impact your students, not just a certain segment of the school. And you know what's impacting educational stakeholders. So on my annual calendar, you know, you want to list the parent workshops and activities that you're doing to help them be contributors to their students' success.
And then we get into the weekly calendars. Now each counselor is to submit their own 2 calendars, one from spring, one from fall. These need to be highly detailed. You need to have dates, times, and a lot of specificity around the events that are on these calendars. We also are going to look at how much time is spent and reflected on this each weekly calendar, especially around what % of time is for direct and indirect hours. Remember that the ASCA recommendation is 80% of your time should be involved in direct and indirect services. And on your annual agreement earlier, you identified how much of your time you were going to spend doing those kinds of activities. We're looking for a match. It doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be closely aligned. The school counselors within a counseling department do not need to select the same week. That doesn't make sense. Each counselor is going to select the week that best represents them delivering a comprehensive school counseling program in the best possible way. We all know that there's some weeks that we get involved in staff development. There's some weeks that we have to be involved in standardized testing, or we're out sick. Those are not weeks that we want to select. We're going to select the weeks, each counselor, that best represent me being a school counselor as a part of the comprehensive program in the best possible way. Again, we're going to choose 1 week from fall, 1 week from spring. We're going to give lots of details. We're going to be very specific about each event, what time it starts, what time it stops. We're going to identify the topics and the activities within those cells. And each of those can be clearly coded. Now, you can color code and you can create codes around the things that are on the right. Core curriculum becomes CC. Individual student planning is ISP. Responsive services, RS. Whatever code you have, if you use a code, make sure that you identify it in the calendar somewhere.
So, like all the other components, except for reflection, there's a piece called the narrative, and we lifted the narrative from the rubric on the top part of this screen, the slide. So what we would suggest, since this is a critical piece of the scoring, that you take that narrative and you break it down into the bullet points. And as you can see, we suggest that you write a paragraph on each of the bullets. So you're going to write a paragraph on how the annual calendar is developed. You're going to talk about what some of the things you thought about, why you put some things on, you know, why some things were prioritized, that kind of information. Maybe who made suggestions. Maybe you shared it with the advisory council and they provided some feedback. Same thing with weekly calendars. How are they developed? And then the last bullet point here is talking about how do you use it but allow it to be fluid, to make adjustments based on what occurs during the school year. Schools, things happen and you make adjustments all the time, and that should be shared in the narrative.
Some questions you can ask yourself about the annual calendar. Is it publicly accessible, whether that's on your website or through newsletters or bulletin boards in the building? How do other people get access to the annual calendar? Is there sufficient detail for stakeholders to be able to plan, join, make sure their children are available for? Does it represent a well-developed, comprehensive program that really does match up with the needs and goals that were identified? Does it match what we see as our vision and mission for the counseling program? And for the weekly calendar, confidentiality needs to be protected. We don't put student names when we submit these. Does it reflect all that you do during the week? This can be challenging because sometimes on those very busiest days, we forget to write things down. So there has to be a lot of intention about maintaining that calendar that week that you're thinking is going to be your representative week? Is it posted? Can people tell what you're doing? And that last question is that posted calendar can become a tool for you, not just to reflect what you're doing, but to help you protect the time that you have set aside for those specific activities.
So here's an example. Here's a template that's available to you. It's not required, but it sure helps you communicate the impact, the detail, the specificity of your calendar. So this is an annual calendar. You can see that it's divided in direct, indirect, and program support. So 80% of direct and indirect is where most of the time should be. This should match your annual agreement. There's a space for things that happen on an ongoing basis. And you can list all those. And then you can list the big events by month. So this is a suggestion. It allows you to provide lots of good details. This can be built over time. You don't have to make this an event and sit down and try to fill it all out, at the end of the year when you're trying to think, well, so what did we do in August? Make it an ongoing template that you record over time. I'm going to tell you that the do's and don'ts come from the National Model Implementation Guide. This is a sampling of the do's and don'ts, and when you read this, there really isn't much that we haven't already said. But this is a really good self-check for you to use to make sure you're on track in implementing calendars in the best possible way. So again, maintain confidentiality. The whole point of a calendar is, one of the points of a calendar is to allow people to see what you do. And you want to use it to communicate, with intent. So using generic terms or using acronyms is not helpful for stakeholders. So be mindful of the calendar as a really terrific advocacy tool for you and your program.
This is an excerpt from an annual calendar that was a really good example. This is from a high school, and you can see this is the line that identifies their ongoing activities. These are the things that are repetitive. They occur every month, regardless of the month. They're ongoing. So you can see that there's some core curriculum, which is always present. They are always working on their career information systems with their 9th grade. There are certain things that happen with individual planning every single month. Certain things about responsive services. We know that we're always available to children for that whenever it becomes necessary. There's an entire list of indirect services that tend to be true for many counselors, all the many things that we have to do, including the referrals, collaboration, and consultation. Those happen all year long, every single month. And then they also identify things under their program planning and school support that, again, happen over and over and over again throughout the school year. The next line of this would then be August, and what are the specifics in addition to these things that are happening during the month of August. And this is an example of a weekly calendar that has a terrific level of specificity. You can see that there's program planning, email responses, consultations that occur early in the morning for those first 15 minutes. There's also hall duty for 30 minutes every day. That's one of the realities. This is from an elementary school, and sometimes we have to do duties like that. But then if you look, you can see how specific they are, that you really get a sense of what was going on with this counselor for the week that they submitted. On Monday at 8:30 for 45 minutes, there was a core curriculum lesson around the rules for fighting in the Fighting Fair program. That was followed with responsive services with a kindergarten boy at 9:15 about some behavior issue, which then led to them a peer mediation for 15 minutes between a 5th grade boy and a 5th grade girl. Both of those are labeled as responsive services. Then there's some email time. Then back into a core curriculum. So the information has very specific start and stop times. It talks about the topic, and it identifies what's going on, and when it references a student, the reference is still maintaining confidentiality. We know it was a boy. We don't know which boy. It's just a first grade boy. Okay?
So the pitfalls in this work is that the use of time does not reflect what you stated in the annual agreement. So we see lots of weekly calendars where people at the bottom of their calendar actually calculate the percentage of direct, indirect, and program support. So we can see that it easily is aligning with the annual agreement. So the other thing that happens is we see no indication that goals are being addressed in the calendars. With that lack of detail that Karen was speaking to, we don't know if this was core curriculum. We don't know if it was responsive services, and it just doesn't really communicate the comprehensiveness of your program, the depth and breadth of the activities that you're doing. I think it's important to remember that a RAMP application is a snapshot of your program. It's not intended to capture everything you do every week of the school year. Calendars are one way to provide some information. So you get to choose the week that you share in fall and spring, and pick a week where you're really doing the work of the school counseling program. We want to thank you for joining us with this, and we hope it's helpful.
And good luck with your application.